Hey folks, welcome back to the Bulletproof Garage. I'm Scott Walters and I'm your host for episode 3 of Project Brutus. Yes, you heard me right. The truck has a name now. Why? Well, I got tired of saying our 1987 Ford F-350 diesel dually crew cab long bed field find. That's no more of that, all right? So it's Project Brutus, and I know what you're thinking. Hey, that's a clever name for a big brute of a truck. I mean, it's a crew cab long bed diesel dually, for crying out loud, all right? Not exactly. It's Project Brutus because it brutalizes my wallet every time I turn around. I tell you, the hits just keep on coming on this truck, and we got some more surprises for you today. Now, what's here in front of me? The 6.9 negative Ghost Rider. This is the 7.3 IDI turbo diesel that I sourced for the truck. I picked it up for $700 complete and turning over but not running. That is a screaming deal. And I got it all disassembled. So on this episode, we're gonna find out if anything on this engine is worth using. Oh, it's gonna be fun, trust me. All right, folks, and even though commercial airline pilots everywhere throw up in their mouths when they hear me say it, sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride here in the Bulletproof Garage. Hey folks, a little bit on the backstory of the engine. Again, 7.3 IDI turbo diesel. These were only made in 2 years, 1993 and 1994. And this is out of a 1994 F-350 cab and chassis truck that was really junk, all right? So it popped up on Facebook Marketplace as a 94 F-350 parts truck. And I inquired about the engine and the guy said, well, it's not a Power Stroke, but it has a turbo. At that point, I got kind of excited, all right, because that means it's likely a 7.3 IDI turbo diesel, and that's what it was. So he was about 2 hours away. So after he verified to me that the engine would indeed turn over, he couldn't get it to run, then that was all I needed to see, right? Because at $700, I mean, the turbo parts are worth that alone. So really hard to go wrong on this deal. But I'm really hoping it's something we can build up and put in Brutus here, because Brutus needs a new bullet, all right? So let's figure out what we've got. Okay, folks, so we figured out early on that what we have here is a remanufactured engine, and I'm not a huge fan of those. How did we figure that out? Well, it took a little bit of detective work, but not much. First, if you look on the valve cover here, there's a tag that indicates that the engine was dyno tested and produced 200 horsepower at 3,000 RPMs. That's actually not too bad for a 7.3 IDI turbo. But that's not a tag that Ford put on their engine. So that's a remanufacturer that did that. The remanufacturer also had 2 number 7 rods and no number 6. So I figured that out and stamped it number 6 as well. So we've got that figured out. Now, a shout out at this point to some of the folks who have helped me out with my research. There are 2 IDI groups on Facebook that I frequent. One, I don't know, one's Ford IDI and the other's just 6.9 and 7.3 IDI. Great folks there, very helpful. Also, 2 forums on the internet, just regular web forums, oilburners.net and ford-trucks.com. And both of those in the 6.9 and 7.3 IDI sections. Great folks, very helpful. Thanks, guys. Okay, folks, here we are at the parts washer cleaning up pistons. And I'm afraid I don't have good news to report, but that's sort of par for the course on this old truck. This is the last piston here, and this one has got real bad scuffing on the skirts. Oh, check that out. That's a dent. Okay, if you can see that right there, that is a real serious dent in the top of the piston. So I'm thinking I know what's happened there. Okay, this one's also got a crack, if you can see it right here. And I think just about every one of these pistons is cracked, and we'll talk more about that. But you can see a few random dents in the top of the piston as well. So it looks like what happened is that somebody was changing glow plugs and they didn't get the glow plug completely out. They dropped half of it down in the chamber, not uncommon on these old trucks, and they just let the engine digest it. And that's what she did. So she took a big dent right there and then spit it out the exhaust at some point, and you can see here the ring is not seated all the way down. All right? So if the ring is not going to seat all the way down, that piston is going to be cockeyed, so it's going to push the skirt out into the cylinder. So that's what happened with this piston. Again, you know, par for the course in this old truck. All right, let's get these rods off if we can and get a detailed look at all these pistons. All right, I got one rod out, so let's see how this is done. So it's got circlips in here, and so these guys, you need sturdy pliers for this. So one out, two out, and then let's see if I can do this without moving it to the vise. Yeah, it's just tapping out. So I'm not worried about tearing up these pistons. I mean, they're junk, right? Well, I need an extra hand as usual. I'm going to do the rest of them on the vise, but just to show you how it's done. All right. So that's out. That's a beefy rod. We'll talk more about the connecting rods here in a few minutes. Okay, folks, taking a closer look at the pistons and connecting rods, I actually have some good news for a change. It's the connecting rods. These are larger, beefier connecting rods that you get only in the 7.3 turbo engine. How do I know that? Because the size of the wrist pin. All right, let me change this to millimeters. The wrist pins on a turbo motor are 33 millimeters. I'm getting 33.22 or 23 here, but good enough for government work. So those are good connecting rods. Now, that's the extent of our good news. Now, after I got the pistons cleaned up, you can see I marked the top of each one of them. And what do you think that might be? Well, it's a crack, of course. Each one of these pistons is cracked. Some worse than others. This has got a crack that starts here and goes all the way over here. These pistons are junk. All right, now why does that happen? It's very simple. All right, you rebuild an old 7.3 IDI turbo, you throw it in a truck and you don't pay attention to your exhaust gas temps, man, you are going to overheat that combustion chamber and you're going to have some serious pressure and heat bearing down on these aluminum pistons. And at some point they're going to give up the ghost. And that's what these are doing very slowly. I mean, it was only a matter of time before they had a catastrophic failure. So folks, pay attention when you're rebuilding your 7.3 or 6.9, especially if it's a turbo. Use quality parts, all right, and install a pyrometer on your truck and pay attention to your exhaust gas temps. Now, what other news do we have here? Well, it's more bad news, of course. You probably won't be able to see that, but stamped on each piston, it says 0.040. And what does that mean? Well, it's 40 thousandths oversized. So the bore on these guys on the 7.3 is 4.11 inches, all right? Now, it's a bored out 6.9, basically. The 6.9 has a 4-inch bore. Now, taking my trusty calipers and switching to inches here. Again, factory is 4.11 and I'm getting 4.146 or so. And that gives you 4.150 basically when you account for a few thousandths of clearance between the piston skirt and the cylinder wall. All right, folks, are y'all ready for some more carnage? Let's check out cylinder number 3 here. And looking at the top of that cylinder, that ridge is hellacious. Look at it, it's so bad you can see it with the naked eye. And that, I measured it, it's around 40 thousandths deep. And so that's in addition to the 40 thousandths overbore that this has. So that cylinder is going to need a sleeve, all right, if the block wasn't junk already. So why would that happen? And it's only in the bottom of the cylinder here, and it's only in cylinder number 3. And I think I figured out why. Okay, folks, so you've seen this piston before. This is the one that has a big dent in it. Now, this event and that event are related. So what we've got here, here's how it happened. So somebody was changing glow plugs, probably using low quality stuff, and these are more prone to break off when you're removing them. So they dropped half of the glow plug down into the cylinder when it broke off and didn't bother to fish it out. So what happened next? All right, they started the truck up again, and when they did, and this piston came up the top dead center, it hit that glow plug and it put a big dent in the top of the piston. All right, and when that happened, it collapsed, you know, this area in the piston, and it pinched down the ring land for the compression ring, and now that piston ring was stuck in place, not able to move in and out of the ring land, and sticking out probably 40 thousandths or so, 50 thousandths. And it being stuck, that's what happened here. Every time that piston went up and down, it wore in the bore. And of course, it's going up and down a few thousand times a minute. So it just wore that into the bore, and that's one of the reasons why this block is junk. All right, it's 40 thousandths over already, and this particular cylinder is 40 thousandths, plus it's got a pretty big divot in it right there. And that piston, as you can see, when it was riding kind of cockeyed in the bore, it also wore on the skirt here pretty well. That's some pretty significant scuffing and scoring. Now, while we're over here, let's talk about measuring the bores, because let's say, you know, as you do sometimes, you may end up just picking up a bare block for a build. And how do you confirm the bore on that block? Now, obviously, we already know that this one is 40 thousandths over because we measured the pistons. But if you didn't know, you could just take your calipers and go up here and get your measurement. And I've got 4.144 and a half, which isn't entirely accurate, right? Because we already know that the block is 4.150. But the problem is at the top of the cylinders, past where the compression ring stops, you're going to have a lot of carbon built up, and that is caked on stuff. And so you are getting that in your measurement, and that is affecting your measurement. So what you do is you get one of these handy little snap gauges. Now, the ends move in and out, and then you lock them down right here, all right? And so what you do is you just put that guy in the bore, walk it down a little bit to where you want to measure, get past that area on the top of the cylinder where you're going to have some carbon built up, all right? And then you want to get it perpendicular. It just takes a little bit of feel to get it right. And then lock it down, tip it out, and then measure it with your calipers. And there I've got 4.150 and a half, all right? So pretty darn accurate. So you're gonna get a better measurement there. And of course you can also measure up and down the bore because the pistons are gonna ride differently depending on where they are in the bore, and you may end up with some taper. All right, so you can measure in several different areas on the bore to give you a better feel for whether you need to bore out your block or not. Now, what's the moral of the story here? The moral of the story is only use high quality glow plugs. And for these engines, that means Motorcraft. Don't use anything else unless you want to go through this ordeal with your IDI engine. Okay, folks, wrapping up on the engine block. In case you haven't figured it out already, let me spell it out for you. It's junk. I mean, it's a boat anchor, right? So Ford specs say don't bore one of these blocks more than 30 thousandths. It's already at 40 thousandths, and it's going to need an overbore to use it from there, right? I mean, we've got that hellacious ridge in this cylinder here. The other cylinders have some scuffing. There's a little minor rust in there. Just honing it out isn't going to do it. So, and especially if we're going to build a turbo motor, all right? You might get by with something in a naturally aspirated motor that you're not going to get by with in a turbo motor. You know, you end up with cracked pistons and all sorts of other things. All right, so we need to source another block, or we could potentially sleeve this. I mean, you could put 8 cylinder sleeves in here. The problem is the cost. I talked to my machinist and he said $1,200 to sleeve all 8. All right, the sleeves themselves are not that expensive. They're like 40 or 50 bucks a piece, but the labor is going to be 100 plus per hole to install them. So I've never been a huge fan of cylinder sleeves, and I certainly don't want to put 8 cylinder sleeves in this, especially when I can find a standard board block somewhere for about 1/3 of the price that I'd pay to have this one sleeved. All right, so that's where we're at. More carnage. That's what we do here in the Bulletproof Garage. All right, folks, it's that time again where I ask for your help. Please do me a favor. Please, if you would, hit the like button and the subscribe button. I would really appreciate it. And the comments, please keep the comments coming. I appreciate the interest. I appreciate the advice. It's very helpful, and I read each and every one. So again, like, subscribe, and comment, all right? Thanks a bunch. All right, on to the crankshaft. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our calipers here and we're going to measure the journals just to see if the crank has been turned undersize. Frankly, once a crank has been turned too far, they end up being junk, all right? So cross your fingers. Let's hope we don't have more junk here. So start off with the main journals. And all right, I'm getting 3.123. 3.123. Same. .123. Wow, okay, 3.122 and a half. That's within tolerance. These haven't been turned. And looking at the journals, none of them appear to be scratched or gouged in any way, so that's good news. And we'll take all the good news we can get at this point. All right, rod journals. All right, 2.499, 2.5, 499, and 2.5, and that is within tolerance. So that's good news. I looked at all the bearings as well, the rod bearings and the main bearings, and none of them had been destroyed or damaged or rubbed completely through. So obviously when you're checking out the crank, that's going to be where you figure out if your crank's having issues. You'll see it on the surface of the crankshaft oftentimes, and then you'll see it on the bearings as well. Now, we do have one issue though. Couldn't escape without having at least one that I need to show you. Okay, folks, you can't make this stuff up, I'll tell you. What we're looking at here is a crankshaft flange, and that's where it bolts to the flywheel or the flex plate, depending if you're running an automatic transmission or a manual. And this one has got a bolt snapped off. All right, you can see where it's snapped off right here. And whoever installed that didn't bother to fix it. I mean, that is just the epitome of laziness. So I should be able to get that out of there without too much trouble, but that's not something that I should have to deal with. It's classic. Okay, folks, it's time to shut it down. I've had enough carnage for one day. All right, just to review the bitting, the 7.3 block is junk, the pistons are junk, but the connecting rods appear to be good, and the same with the crankshaft, so that's good news. So all's not lost. And don't forget, I only paid $700 for the entire engine, and the turbo bits alone are worth about $1,000. So at the end of the day, not such a big deal. All right, now where does that leave us? Well, that leaves us with the 6.9 looking like a more viable option, right? Now, even more so because I checked the pistons and the bores today. It's a standard bore block. All right, so that's probably the direction we're headed unless something else happens to fall in my lap. All right, folks, signing off. See you next time with Project Brutus at the Bulletproof Garage.